trees literally alive with parrots, and as I stopped to admire them I could see that when they opened their vivid green wings the inner parts were of a brilliant flame colour, and there was a ruddy orange patch upon the little feathers at the inset of their tails. Then we came upon monkeys again, quite a family of them, and instead of running away and leaping from branch to branch they began to chatter and shriek and dash about in the greatest excitement, just as if they were scolding us for coming among them, chattering among themselves directly as if meditating an attack. Before an hour had passed, after noting the beauty of the butterflies, which seemed to increase in number as we penetrated further into the interior, we came next upon an enormous tree full of gaudily tinted parrakeets, which were nearly as numerous as the parrots of an hour before. "We shan't want for food, Joe," said the doctor, "so long as we have plenty of powder. Parrakeets and birds are fruit birds and splendid eating. Look there." As he spoke he raised his gun, fired, and directly the report had struck my ears I saw Jimmy and Gyp set off at full speed. They returned both at odds, the one growling, the other calling his rival a bad bunyip dog, but both holding tightly to a large bird, Gyp having its head, Jimmy the legs. It proved to be something between a turkey and a pheasant, and from its look it promised to be good eating, for which purpose it was handed over to Ti-hi's care. The leader now bore off a little to our left, the result being that we once more struck the river, to find it a large swift stream, but not an attractive place for travellers, since from that one spot where we stood beneath the shelter of some trees I counted at least 20 crocodiles floating slowly down, with the protuberances above their eyes just visible, and here and there at least 30 more lying about on the muddy banks. Towards evening, as we were journeying slowly on, Jimmy came running back to fetch me, and catching me by the hand he led me through some bushes to where a thickly wooded park-like stretch of land began, and motioning me to be silent and follow him, he crept from tree to tree till, having reached what he considered to be a satisfactory position, he pointed upward, and from behind the tree where we were ensconced I looked among the branches far overhead, and for the first time saw one of those wonderfully plumaged creatures, the birds of paradise. I could have stopped there for long, gazing at the beautiful creatures with their fountain-like plumage of pale gold, but time would not permit of my lagging behind, and to Jimmy's great disgust I hurried back, and determined that no object should lead me away from the great aim of our journey. The turkey was ample as a meal for us, but we wanted food for our followers, so as to husband our flour and biscuits. Birds were all very well, but we wanted to kill something more substantial, and for a long time past we had seen no sign of deer, though traces of buffalo were pretty frequent in spots where they had made a peculiar track down to the river, evidently going regularly to quench their thirst. The sight of the buffalo tracks formed the subject of a discussion. Fresh meat was wanted for our followers, who made very light of birds, and one of these animals would have been invaluable to us just then, but the doctor decided that it would not be prudent to follow them, they being rather dangerous beasts, and therefore, though the meat would have been so useful both for present use and to dry in the sun, we gave up the idea of trying to obtain any, preferring to trust to finding deer, and continued our journey. We had gone very little further, and I was just about to propose to the doctor that we should venture as far as the river and try for some fish, when there was an alarm given by the native who was leading, and in an instant loads were thrown down and every man sought refuge in a tree. We did not understand the natives' words, but their actions were easy enough to read, and all followed their example, the doctor and I getting up into the same tree, one which forked very low down, and we were just in safety when we heard a cry and saw that Jack Penny was in difficulties. He too had climbed part of the way into a tree when he had slipped, and in spite of all his efforts he could not at first contrive to get back, and this was just as a rushing noise was heard that I thought must be a herd of buffalo, but directly after a drove of small wild pig came furiously charging down. My attention was divided between the sight of the pigs and Jack Penny, whose long legs kept dropping down, then being spasmodically snatched up. I burst into a roar of laughter, and Jimmy, who was standing, spear in hand, upon a branch, holding on by another, danced with excitement and delight. "Pull yourself right up, Jack!" I shouted, and I had hard work to make my voice heard above the grunting and squealing. "I can't!" he yelled back. "Then kick out at the little brutes!" I shouted, and just then he lowered himself to the full length of his arms, swung to and fro, and half a dozen pigs rushed at him, but he had gained impetus, and just as they made a dash at him he swung his legs up and clung with them to a branch. "Hurrah!" I shouted, and then a sharp squeal uttered by one unfortunate pig as Jimmy drove his spear through it as it passed beneath his feet, and the sharp report of the doctor's piece brought me to my senses. The scene had been so comical, especially as regarded Jack Penny, that I had forgotten I was letting several good dinners slip away, and I had just time to get a quick shot at one of the pigs, which was stamping his hoof and grunting defiantly at Jack Penny, before the whole drove, including one that received an arrow from Ti-hi's bow, swept by us as hurriedly as they came, and were gone. "Not hurt, are you, Jack?" I said, preparing to jump. "Keep your place," cried the doctor. "They may come back." "Well, I shall have a better shot at them," I said. "You foolish boy!" cried the doctor. "Why, the boars would rip you to pieces." I returned to my place at this, and it was fortunate that I did so, for directly after, as if in the wildest of haste, the pig drove came dashing back, to stop as hastily as they came up, and stand snapping, tossing their heads, grunting, squealing, and at times literally barking at us. A couple of shots which laid low one of their party seemed, however, to scare them, and they dashed on once more, and hardly had they gone 20 yards before there was a loud thud, and Jack Penny fell from the branch where he had been clinging, flat upon his back. "Oh my!" he cried as he sat up and looked about. "I couldn't hold on any longer. It's lucky they're gone." "Look out!" I cried, swinging myself down, dropping my gun, and pulling my hatchet from my belt, but Jack would have fared badly if he had depended upon me, for the little boar that had been wounded by an arrow had dropped apparently dying when its companions swept by the second time, but it had fierce life enough left in it to take advantage of Jack Penny's helpless condition, and leaping up it charged at him, its tusks glistening and the foam tossed from its snapping jaws falling upon its sides. A bullet would have given the fierce beast its quietus, but the doctor would not fire for fear of hitting Jack, and he sat with his gun raised waiting for an opportunity. Jack saw his danger and rolled himself over, trying vainly the while to drag his axe from his belt. Then, just as the furious little boar was dashing at him, I saw something black dart down from above. There was a rush, a squeal, and the boar was literally pinned to the earth, while Jimmy stood grinning and staring from the doctor to me and back, as if asking to be complimented upon his feat. For it really was a feat. He had jumped fully 10 feet to the ground, spear in hand, and literally thrown himself upon the little boar. "A magnificent jump, Jimmy!" I cried. "Jimmy de boy to jump," he said complacently. "Pig kill Mass Jack Penny. Jimmy no spear 'em." "Yes, I s'pect I should have ketched it pretty warmly," said Jack, gathering himself up. "Oh, I say, I did come down such a bump, Joe Carstairs, it seemed to shake my back joints all to pieces." "Jimmy spear 'em little pig," said the black. "Yes, and I'll give you my knife for it," said Jack, taking out his great clasp knife. "It's a real good one, Jimmy, and I wouldn't have parted with it for a deal." Jimmy got knife.